So, a bit of a confession. When I was first asked to give today's sermon, my gut reaction was, I'm a guy. I can't preach on Mother's Day. Fortunately, my more thoughtful cognitive reaction to that gut reaction came pretty quickly, and I found myself both amused and curious to analyze my visceral response. I mean, right now across this city, a majority of the pulpits are occupied by men preaching on Mother's Day. So it is neither illegal nor impossible. I realized that what prompted my reaction was that in my previous ministry, I served with an amazing female-identified minister who is a mom and who wanted to speak on Mother's Day. And I was always grateful when she did. It just made sense. And what made sense this year was that the female-identified ministers here asked me to preach because they already had plenty to do leading up to today. So I'm grateful to be up here and grateful to have this opportunity to engage my creativity in a new way. Creativity is the Soul Matters theme for the month of May. And today we're exploring the ways that our creativity can find itself constrained by roles and labels. Sometimes others box us in, sometimes we box ourselves in. How can we break out of the confines that keep us from flourishing, keep us from engaging in the kinds of creativity that can be life-giving and life-sustaining? We just heard Ryan share with us the kinds of limits that existed around gender in his family of origin, what kinds of toys that he as a boy was expected and allowed to play with. He was drawn to a purple purse and the idea of a Barbie dream house, but he was denied those things, and they were deemed inappropriate. As many of you know and have perhaps experienced, his situation is not at all unique. I know that there are women in this room who wanted to wear pants or go to the hardware store in times and places where women and girls were discouraged from doing those things. I know that in this room there are men who were steered away from cooking or sewing or any number of creative activities that were stereotypically thought to be the province of females. Or perhaps those men steered themselves away from such activities out of a perceived need for safety. Sometimes it's other people and sometimes it's ourselves who keep us in the box. And sometimes even if we're ready and the people around us are ready, sometimes the broader world isn't ready for us to step out of the box and cross traditional lines. When I was about 11 or 12, I thought it would be cool if I could learn to tap dance like the guys I saw in old movies, performers like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. So I went to check out a tap dance class run by the rec department in our town. I was the only boy there, perhaps the only boy who had ever been there. I remember the teacher being nice but not really prepared for a male student. The dance moves the girls in the class were doing seemed to my young mind more like the moves that a chorus line would do and not what Bing and Bob were doing. Being there felt awkward, and being there in my body felt awkward, and I never went back after that first class. My sister, meanwhile, continued to take classes at a local dance school, and over the years I went to a few of the recitals, which were very long and featured hundreds of students. The only males were in the audience. That was where we were supposed to be. And you know, this was not the 1700s. This was around 1980. And society, or at least the somewhat conservative little corner of it that was my world, didn't have a place for certain kinds of creative expression to flourish. I understand that things are better now, and I did eventually find ways to integrate dancing into my life, and I enjoy it to this day. But I do sometimes wonder how different my life, or at least my relationship with the movement of my body, might have been different if I had grown up in a less rigid time or place. Reflecting on my tap dance experience this past week, I thought of another box I wasn't entirely able to break out of while growing up. I participated in 4-H for a couple of years, and I signed up for a cooking class. I was only moderately interested in cooking, but I've always been extremely interested in eating, and cooking seemed like a helpful step. I was the only boy in that environment too, and I participated for I think a couple years. There weren't any awkward dance moves, and the 4-H groups met in people's homes, so there weren't any other guys around to see what I was doing. But I slid back into the box later in middle school, when every single person in shop class was male, and the only guy I could remember taking home ec was a football player who could get away with it without having his maleness questioned. My story is just one among many. Many of us from all kinds of backgrounds know what it's like to be in the audience and not allowed on the stage. The women in my life can offer countless examples from schools and workplaces, or just go to any Brewers, Bucks, or Packers game and see the millionaire males in the spotlight with women limited to spectator and supportive roles. And while I joke about being a man preaching on Mother's Day, the idea of women in the pulpit is actually a quite new and positive development in human history. The world is a mix of beautiful progress and plenty of stubborn boxes. Parenting, of course, has so much to do with it. The home or homes we spend our childhoods in can really set the stage for the flourishing of our creative selves. A few weeks ago, a sticker on the back window of a large family vehicle caught my eye. At the top, in large cursive letters, it said, "Raising, raising." The rest was in smaller print, so I had to look closely, and when I did, I could see what the whole thing said. Raising Jesus-loving, truth-seeking, free-thinking patriots. And I thought to myself, I think there's a contradiction here. Each of these things, depending on how they're defined, can be quite good on their own. I know lots of people who love Jesus and are nourished by the idea that he loves them back. I consider myself to be quite truth-seeking and free-thinking. And patriotism that doesn't morph into jingoism or nationalism or militarism can be a healthy thing to have. I never saw or met the driver of that van, but based on the website where I later found the sticker, I suspect the van's owner and I might have a different definition of truth-seeking. And I'm quite sure we have different concepts of what free-thinking means based on the prescriptive nature of items on that list. That sticker was a reminder that what happens at home matters so much. The writer Anne Lamott this past week ventured into this territory of what it means to be raising another human being. She's a mother who loves her son almost beyond description, but she does not feel that the experience of being a parent has made her better at love than the people who have not been parents. She says she's met many parents who are not good at love at all. And she has some thoughts about prescriptive parenting that's full of boxes. Here's what she posted a few days ago. It's a little radical. A majority of American parents secretly feel that if you have not had and raised a child, your capacity for love is somehow diminished. They secretly believe that non-parents cannot possibly know what it is to love unconditionally, to be selfless, to put yourself at risk for the gravest loss. But in my experience, she says, it's parents who are prone to exhibit terrible self-satisfaction and selfishness, who can raise children as adjuncts, like rooms added on in a remodel. Often their children's value and achievements in the world are reflected glory, necessary for these parents' self-esteem and sometimes for the family's survival. This, she says, is how children's souls are destroyed. I do think her comments get at something we've been talking about, the differing ideas of what success looks like in a child. To some parents, success looks like a boy who doesn't want to play with a purple toy purse. It looks like a girl who's happy being a cheerleader and not an athlete. Success looks like a child who accepts the limitations created by a firm gender binary, a binary that is demonstrably and scientifically false. Success is how well everyone follows rules that no one questions. Success is a quashing of creativity. This is how children's souls are destroyed. The good news is that there are a lot of parents who are not like this. Rather, they see the sacred calling of their parenthood as one of stewardship of a young life into its full blossoming, not an industrial process of self-duplication and control. I know these parents, and you do too. We saw them on stage, and we see them all around us this morning. All of these relationships on the micro level of home and family also play out on the macro level of the public square. Last month in my sermon, I mentioned the Feldman test, the 4-question quiz about parenting that can determine whether a person has authoritarian tendencies. Questions like whether you think it's more important for a child to have curiosity or good manners. Over decades of studies, survey respondents who choose things like obedience over self-reliance and good manners over curiosity, and who are wary of a child's independence, are more likely to support authoritarian leaders. And I do suspect that these respondents who are parents might be less interested in letting their children grow into who they are, and more interested in making sure their children don't stray outside of certain boxes. Boxes that make the parents feel comfortable and successful and validate their own choices and way of being. Where I see all this converging is in the states that are most firmly in the grip of authoritarian politicians. States like Tennessee and Idaho and Florida, where it is increasingly scary to be a child. In such places, people and performers whose identities and ways of moving through the world do not correspond to certain narrow and outdated boxes. These folks are being stripped of basic rights, like access to life-saving medical care, or being able to appear in public spaces in whatever gender expression they choose. And citizens who have been programmed to believe in obedience and narrow ideas of gender roles are fertile ground for both authoritarianism and transphobia. And this crisis has many layers as we witness the success of anti-democracy movements, the effects on the lives of trans people of all ages, and the loss to society of diversity and creativity and new ways of being. And that, of course, points to the big threat to those who wish to have a rigid, cisgender, patriarchal, greed-based society: creativity. Creativity is delightfully dangerous. The creativity to live outside the boxes that prop up the systems that we have. The creativity to imagine a world where human flourishing is centered, where violence and conquest are never celebrated, where greed is shunned and meeting needs in community is what's exalted. Creativity is so powerful because it can be used to produce art and writing and stories that convey messages of hope and new visions. And creativity can be used to strategically plot resistance. And creativity, in its most elemental form, the bringing into being of something that did not previously exist, that kind of creativity can have profound spiritual benefits. In our 21st century consumer-oriented culture, we are easily divorced from creative processes. Almost everything that we humans used to make for ourselves, food, clothing, shelter, tools, art, music, all these are now created by a minority and purchased by the majority. So it's so easy to forget that we all have the potential to be makers. We risk losing the satisfaction of seeing the fruits of our labors, of bringing something new into the world, and miss out on the healing powers of creating. We can forget that we all have generative power. Fortunately, each of us is a maker. Our opening reading from the Reverend Marcus Liefert reminds us that not only do we have sculptors and painters to thank for what they make, but also those who make jokes and who make coffee and who make the bed. Even if we feel that we lack the skills so often associated with creativity, we can still be makers. We can make room for the stranger. We can make conversation. We can make new friends. Each of us makes something, and we all have the power of generativity. As James Baldwin once said, "The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. The world is ours for the making." And making need not be a solitary venture. Indeed, so much generativity emerges from community and from the spaces we create for each other to explore and flourish. And so I want to leave you with an image of creative expression, of flourishing, an image that happened right here in this very room, just a week ago, right now. Our musicians were making music, wonderful, inspiring, uplifting music of the kind we seem to be blessed with here every Sunday. I don't remember which song they were performing, but I so clearly remember what I could see from up here on the chancel. It was a vision of joy and expressiveness taking place up high beyond the tops of all your heads in the golden light of our balcony. A little girl, one of the youngest members of our community, was literally moved by the music. As glorious sounds filled this room, she got up and she began to dance back and forth, twirling as the melody and spirit inspired her soul, moving through the physical space around her to express her enthusiasm. She knew that she was in a safe, nurturing environment where she could embody delight, all because of the loving village arrayed down below in front of her. May we all be as blessed and creative and free. May it be so, and amen.